Hello, wrestling fans, and welcome to the first edition of This Week in Wrestling from the Vault. I'm your host, Chris Belcher. I appreciate you being with me. Before I go any further, I want to take the opportunity to thank Andy and the guys from the Dorks Next Door for allowing me to partner with them in producing this awesome wrestling content. On every show, every week, we are going to discuss major events that happened in wrestling history, a little this day in history, if you will. We'll look at birthdays, deaths, anniversaries, everything in between. So you can check out the video version right here. You can also check out a daily written version, a daily column on the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Network as part of dorksnextdoor.com. So obviously the video show, as well as the articles, columns on the website, we can't cover every single thing that happened. So we're going to give you highlights on the video version, share my thoughts on those events, and as part of the daily column, you're going to get a little bit more in-depth as to what happened each day in wrestling history. So before we get into it, I want to make sure that I give credit to our sources. ProFightDB.com is where all the research for all these dates comes from. So let's kick off this show with birthdays. We are covering the week of June 22nd through the 28th on today's episode. So we're going to start out with current IWGP Heavyweight and Intercontinental Champion Tetsuya Naito, born in 1982 during this week. Now, Naito has become a mainstay in New Japan over the last several years. He's feuded with all the top guys over there. I specifically remember his matches with Chris Jericho, some great stuff that he has done over the years. So happy birthday to him this week. For you old school fans, John Tenta, better known as Earthquake in the WWF and Avalanche and Shark in the WCW. His birthday is this week, as well as J.J. Dillon. Many of you also remember him as the original manager for the Four Horsemen back in the day, Arn and Tully and Ole and Flair, of course. J.J. Dillon was definitely a part of that group. You also remember him as an authority figure in the late 90s on WCW television. What many of you may not know, though, is J.J. Dillon was head of talent relations in the WWF for a long time. In fact, when the steroid trial of 1994 came up, there was some major pay cuts for the staff. JJ couldn't afford to take a pay cut at that time because he has a special needs child. And, you know, as far as that goes, you need all the funds that you can get. So paying for an expensive house in Connecticut, as well as taking care of his special needs child, proved to be too much for JJ. And he went on for greener pastures, literally, in WCW at that time. So also, for you old school fans, might remember the movie No Holds Barred. This week is the birthday of Tiny Lister, better known as Zeus, from the No Holds Barred movie and also his sporadic appearances in WWF. He was born in 1958 of this week. For you current WWE fans, referee Jessica Carr celebrates her birthday this week. She was recently called up from NXT and is now on SmackDown. Also, Billie Kay of the Iconics celebrates her birthday this week. We have to move from birthdays to deaths, from one end of life to the other. I don't know of a good transition to do that. I'll find one, I promise. It's certainly not something to be taken lightly, but this week is the anniversary of the passing of quite a few wrestlers. I want to touch on just a few of them. Matt Bourne, the original Doink the Clown, as well as Big Josh in the early 90s of WCW. He died in 2013 of a drug overdose. Matt actually only portrayed Doink for a short amount of time during the first 2 years of the character's run. Matt was let go at the end of 1993. And then in 94, Doink was portrayed by Ray Apollo and then was passed on to several other characters. Matt would, however, take that gimmick to the indie circuit, and he did some spot appearances. Actually, I think he appeared as Doink for the gimmick battle royal for the 1000th anniversary of Raw. That was actually the original. That was Matt Bourne. According to Bruce Pritchard, however, the original concept, the original idea for Doink came from Road Warrior Hawk. So, fun fact there. That's very interesting. Also passing away this week in 1992 was the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. Buddy died of a heart failure in 92, and he was the one that Ric Flair has openly admitted he stole everything from. His strut, his robe, his moveset, the figure four, all that was originally Buddy Rogers. And tragically, even though most people aren't going to acknowledge it, we want to recognize that during this week in 2007, the tragic deaths of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and son Daniel. Just a horrific scene at their home outside of Atlanta, Georgia, during this week in 2007. If you're interested in hearing more about that story, I encourage you to check out Dark Side of the Ring, the show that's on Vice. Their first episode of this season was about the Chris Benoit, not only the incidents that happened in 2007, but his entire career. It's a fantastic 2-part documentary series that I highly encourage that you go check out. All right, so we move on now to major events and pay-per-views that happened during this week throughout wrestling history. Like I said, we're not going to cover everything. If you want a daily dose of this day in wrestling history from the vault, you want to check out our columns, our written columns, dorksnextdoor.com. Make sure you check them out as part of the Pipe Bomb Wrestling Network. So we're going to do our best when we cover these in video form to highlight each of the major companies as best we can. So we're going to start with ECW. In 1994, we saw a taping at the ECW arena that saw Taz go one-on-one with Jimmy Snuka. That's right. I don't know that I remember him competing in ECW, but that's what the research says. Jimmy Snuka versus Taz, 1994. I don't know if that's available online or not. I didn't dig that far into it, but I encourage you, if you're baffled like me that Jimmy Snuka wrestled in ECW in 1994, make sure that you go look it up, check that out. In 1996, another ECW show. This was a pay-per-view, Hardcore Heaven. This is where Chris Jericho captures his only ECW championship during his short run there. He defeated Pitbull number 2 for the ECW television championship. Jericho obviously made a huge impact in ECW during his short run, but that was his championship during that show in early 1996. Obviously, he would go on to WCW. I think it's later that year. Yes, he would move on to WCW, I think later that year. I may be getting my timeline mixed up. But that's neither here nor there. Speaking of WCW, Clash of Champions number 27 happened in 1994. This week in history saw an incredible main event that night. Ric Flair defeating Sting to unify the World Heavyweight Championship and the International Championship. Of course, that debacle happened when Ric Flair left WCW in late 91, and he took the belt with him. So many of you know that the world title actually appeared, the big gold as we know it, appeared on WWF television for a brief stint. A lot of tapings that you see, it was blurred out. So it forced WCW to create a new championship. And that was then considered the World Heavyweight Championship. When Flair returned, they were able to get the big gold back. They called it the International Championship. That Clash of Champions between Ric Flair and Sting saw the unification of that title, Flair getting the victory. It's a really underrated match between these two, to be honest. In terms of actual wrestling, it's probably my favorite that these two ever had. So I encourage you to go check that out. Clash of Champions 27, 1994. I highly recommend it. Also in WCW 1996, there was a live event in Hartford, Connecticut that was headlined by the Nature Boy Ric Flair defeating the Macho Man Randy Savage. Now, I bring this up because of some special circumstances surrounding this particular match. I actually saw this same house show lineup this same main event in 1996, but I did not see this specific situation that I'm about to inform you guys of. Listen to this. If you thought Jimmy Snuka wrestling in ECW was weird, how about the special referee for Ric Flair versus Randy Savage was Bruno Sammartino? I know Bruno had a short stint, I think early on in WCW. I think in the early 90s, he tried his hand at some commentary. But in 96, doing a special guest referee spot, that's definitely something to pull out of the bag and to tell all your friends, hey, did you know that Bruno Sammartino? So, that's one to pull out for you. On to 1 second. Swig of sweet tea for the working man. I'm a one-man show here. I don't get to take a break. Hang on. Good stuff. All right. So let's move on to the WWF / the WWE. Obviously, when you talk about June, the major show for WWF back in the day was the King of the Ring. Most of those seem to fall during this time period, so we're going to look back at a couple of those. The first one that I bring up is 1996. Featured a great main event between Shawn Michaels and the British Bulldog for the WWF Championship. However, a match obviously gets overlooked because a certain promo was cut that night by the King of the Ring winner, Stone Cold Steve Austin. That's right. This week in 1996, that famous promo was cut and Austin 316 was born. Also, who can forget King of the Ring 1998? Of course, we know that is significant for the Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Mankind, where Mankind gets hurled. They hurled him off of the cell through the table. Still the most infamous match in WWF history, one could argue. So that took place this week in 1998. There's an Untold special. It's called WWE Untold on the network that specifically talks about The Undertaker and Mankind in this match. I encourage you to go check that out. We round out the King of the Ring shows with 2001. That happened almost 20 years ago. That was the night Kurt Angle wrestled 3 matches, including an incredible street fight against Shane McMahon. Again, another WWE Untold episode about that specific match. WWE does a lot of the Untold specials about some specific things, and they're always really, really, really good. It's really a nice behind the scenes look. So I encourage you to go check out the Kurt Angle, Shane McMahon, as well as The Undertaker and Mankind. Again, an incredible street fight from King of the Ring 2001. Vengeance 2005 took place this week in wrestling history as well. That event is known for another Hell in a Cell match. This one is Batista versus Triple H for the World Heavyweight Championship. An incredible match. And if I'm not mistaken, it's the culmination of their feud in 2005. So go check that match out, as well as the incredible WrestleMania 21 rematch between Kurt Angle and the Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels. Shawn picks up the win at the Vengeance show. Of course, Angle had Shawn tap out at WrestleMania 21. So that incredible rematch happened in 2005 during this week. One more significant moment this week in the world of WWE that I want to touch on, that's from SmackDown Live in 2017. And that show is significant because it featured the Women's Money in the Bank rematch. Of course, we had the controversy at the actual Money in the Bank pay-per-view where James Ellsworth grabs the briefcase for Carmella. So we had the rematch and Carmella wins again. So let me just say, there's a lot of controversy surrounding that, and I don't really understand the beef. Okay. Many people said that WWE finally gave the women the spotlight in a big match and a man won the match. Okay, well, that wasn't their intention, number one. So don't read into that. Obviously, because they had the match again and Carmella won again. So the match was booked to get heat with Carmella and James Ellsworth because they were heels at the time. So that's just another way of getting heat. It wasn't this man versus woman deal that everybody made it out to be. So just I don't understand what that controversy was about. I thought it was just a great way of telling the same story, just adding another layer to the Carmella and James Ellsworth situation. Whatever the case may be, Carmella gets the briefcase again. It was a great match to have on SmackDown, and if I remember right, I think the second match, the one on SmackDown, was actually better than the pay-per-view event. So go check that out. It's on the WWE Network, as well as all of this other stuff that I've talked about. You can find it all on the WWE Network. I'm not trying to run a cheap plug for the network, just telling you that all these great events happened this week in wrestling history. So make sure that you continue to check out our website, follow our daily column, leave us some comments and reviews. We would be happy to hear from you, be happy to share your thoughts on air as well. Again, weekly video show, daily written columns about this week in wrestling from the vault. You can also check out all of our weekly show reviews. We've got all the shows that you can ask for written by all the guys contributing on the website. So make sure you check out our video show as well, where we talk all things this week in wrestling. That's going to do it for this show. I'm Chris Belcher. Thanks for joining me on This Week in Wrestling History from the Vault. We'll catch you guys next time.